Giuffre, how Epstein twisted her. Hello, I'm H.G. Tudor. In an earlier video, I explained how Jeffrey Epstein used the manipulation of triangulation in relation to Rena O and Virginia Giuffree and other women that he abused. Not only did he achieve this during his lifetime, but he did so following his death. As part of the article and interview with Rena O, she was asked what she thinks about Virginia Giuffree now in light of Giuffre's recent memoir. O stated, "I absolutely think that Virginia Giuffree was a victim. She began her life in a very tragic way. There are a lot of people who failed her. But eventually Virginia became a victimizer and her morals were twisted. I think she had a hard time distinguishing right from wrong." When people are asked about Virginia Giuffree, this tends to elicit two camps by way of responses. The first, those that see her as very much of a victim of a sexually abusive narcissist, Jeffrey Epstein, another sexually abusive narcissist, Ghislaine Maxwell, a young girl who was abused and trafficked and utilized by a powerful and wealthy serial sex offender. There are others that see her as blameworthy, that regard her as no more than a prostitute, that benefited from the interactions, that relished the interactions, that was complicit in the trafficking of other women and did so willingly because she was being paid. And therefore, there are those that reject that victim status. It might be said that there's a third camp where people see perhaps elements of both. That's probably where Rena O would sit, that she sees her as a victim, but somebody whose morals were twisted. The fact is that when it comes to Virginia Giuffree, those that criticize her in terms of her affected credibility, the fact that they believe that she actually relished what she did, that she benefited as a consequence of the financial inducements that she received, and in fact appear to have little sympathy for her, invariably have little understanding of the dynamic that takes place between a narcissist and their victim. There are lots of ways that the narcissist can utilize for the purposes of gaining control over an individual. My many thousands of videos detail those different ways by which the narcissist will draw a person in and also keep them ensnared through a variety of differing manipulations, some benign, many malign, and you can work through my extensive playlists explaining about the dynamic with the narcissist, the manipulations, the revealing of the narcissist to understand more. In effect, I think it would be fair to say that one can group them into 5 main fields of manipulation that are particularly effective. The first, isolation from support networks. The second, financial control. Third, emotional manipulation. Fourth, monitoring and surveillance. Fifth, threats and intimidation. Not every narcissist will utilize manipulations from each of those 5 fields. They may do so from only some, and the extent to which they rely upon those fields will differ. But if one was to advance a 5-fingered approach, if you will, to the manipulation of an individual, it would be those 5 that I've mentioned just there. But this is also particularly effective when it comes to the selection of a youthful victim, which many of Jeffrey Epstein's victims were. He selected youthful victims because it was invariably easier to isolate them from support networks. They invariably didn't have a romantic partner because they were so young. They weren't married. They didn't live with a romantic partner. Thus, that would reduce the interference. It's also the case that he would select individuals that would have troubled relationships with their parents, meaning that a so-called mentor or benefactor, such as he presented himself as, would be all the more attractive. In effect, he sought individuals that were part way to isolation as a consequence of their life circumstances, and he ensured that they were in effect were isolated as he asserted control over them. Financial control was a huge part of what he did. As a very wealthy individual, he utilised his financial firepower, which again was particularly useful as against young individuals, because they had not earned particularly much themselves. They had not lived much of life, and therefore even a few $1,000s would seem like a lot of money to individuals that he often selected from poor backgrounds also. He utilised intimidation with regard to subtle information as to what could occur to individuals. For instance, reference was made to the knowledge that he had about Virginia Giuffre's brother. Again, this is particularly effective against young individuals because they don't have much experience of life. They don't have much in the way of role models. They don't have much of experience of how life should function, and therefore are particularly impressionable. Accordingly, by selecting young victims and utilising isolation, financial control and intimidation, this enabled Epstein to be all the more effective. The naivety of certain victims is also something that would be exploited by him. They don't have much to measure against the behaviour that they're experiencing. They're easily impressed as a consequence of a lack of life experience. It's also the case, of course, by virtue of being youthful, they are found to be more physically attractive to him because, well, in effect, age has not had its impact upon them. Invariably, they had not had children. They hadn't suffered the wear and tear, if you will, of a well-lived life. And that also, for the type of narcissist that he was, proved an attractor. His selection of youthful victims was a calculated step because it allowed him to use isolation, financial control and intimidation to the maximum degree, as those type of individuals are particularly susceptible to that. And this is something that resulted in the twisting of Virginia Giuffre and other victims. That she became conditioned to his behaviours so that they became a normal for her. That her own moral compass became skewed as a consequence of the demands that were placed upon her, her eagerness to please, and the fact that she was able to earn from him. Her independence didn't exist. She became reliant upon him. It's very easy for individuals that have no understanding of the narcissistic dynamic to look at a victim that has made mistakes and engaged in reprehensible behaviours and to suggest that they are the problem. What they fail to understand is that the external stressor of the continued application of abuse reduces people's emotional empathy, reduces their empathic traits, heightens their narcissistic traits, so that they become twisted, sometimes beyond recognition, that they engage in behaviours themselves which become reprehensible and questionable. They may, for instance, engage in physical violence, the commission of infidelity. They may engage in stealing, smearing individuals. They may engage in not supporting people in the way that they once did. In the case of the victims of Epstein, and in particular Virginia Giuffre, the application of the external stressor of the abuse, combined with the fact that she was a youthful individual and therefore all the easier to exploit and far more receptive to those exploitative manipulations, meant that her moral compass became skewed, that her compassion and caring for others was reduced, that she became conditioned to behave in a particular way that Epstein wanted, which resulted in her being a victimizer herself. It is the case, of course, that the formation of a narcissist involves a lack of control environment and a genetic predisposition towards becoming a narcissist. In effect, the abused becomes the abuser. But it is also the case that an individual who may not be a narcissist themselves can behave in a way that is commensurate with that they become twisted by their experiences as a consequence of the sustained application of abuse towards them. And this is clearly the case in relation to Virginia Giuffre, that caused her to become less credible, that caused her to perhaps tell lies, that caused her to recruit other individuals, that caused her to continue to go back. There are those that think that she was a willing participant. For individuals to think in such a way, they fail to understand the nature of abuse and the impact that it has, particularly on somebody as young as she was. Her mind had not formed. Her brain had not stopped developing. It wouldn't until the mid-20s, which means that it would still be malleable to the influences of the external stressor of abuse, with the outcome that she did become twisted in the way that Rena O describes, that her youth and the lack of established understanding and behaviours meant that she was all the more malleable to the likes of a calculated manipulator like Jeffrey Epstein. It is why she was targeted. It meant that not only was she easy to draw in and ensnare in the first place, it meant that he could manipulate her to do his bidding, so that her own morals became lost, that she didn't know right from wrong, that she became a bully herself. It does not mean that she became a narcissist. It means that her emotional empathy was reduced to such an extent that she engaged in the very behaviours that she'd been subjected to herself. This does happen. I've seen it on numerous occasions, and those that automatically blame those victims and basically claim they were enjoying it, they loved it, they were part of it, they wanted it, fail to understand the complexity of the impact of the narcissist's behaviour upon that individual, the way that a young person is particularly exploitative and susceptible to the impact of those manipulations, and that how this is very much a part of the narcissistic dynamic. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for listening.